Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And whether you're live streaming viewers or podcasters, we don't care. We're just happy to be watched. So thank you if you're already doing that, or if you do sometime in the future. And of course, this is Free Thought Hour, and which means that I have my glamorous co-host, Tercia, with me. Hello, Tercia. How the devil are you?
Glamorous nogal. Well. Is that what they say down in hell? Because we've had 2 days of 41 plus degrees. So yes, very nice summer in South Africa, but it cools down in the evening, and as now I have the fan on me. So yes. How are you, John? You're not sweating. I bet that.
No, I'm not sweating here. It's about 4 here. But obviously tomorrow, if you can make it to Views on the News, I'm going to have to introduce the panel as the wise, the witty, and the sweaty.
I prefer glamorous.
Okay, right. Anyway, let's get our guest on. Jim, how the devil are you?
Doing pretty good. It's 40 here as well, but that's Fahrenheit. So,
so if I do my, it's about 10 degrees Celsius. Am I right? Thereabouts. 10
I don't know. Unfortunately, we don't do smart units here. We do Trump units here. Really dumb units. So.
Oh well. Now, having said that, you're introducing a video which I've got to show people during this show. Would you like to see it now?
Well, since I led in with Trump, we might as well go see what the nut jobs have got to say.
And then we'll talk to you and find out all about you later. Okay. Take a look at this. Get your eyeballs on this. It is amazing.
And on June 14th, 1946, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God gave us Trump. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, fix this country, work all day, fight the Marxists, eat supper, then go to the Oval Office and stay past midnight at a meeting of the heads of state. So God made Trump. I need somebody with arms, strong enough to rustle the deep state, and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to ruffle the feathers, tame cantankerous World Economic Forum, come home hungry, have to wait until the First Lady is done with lunch with friends, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon, and mean it. So God gave us Trump.
Oh my God. Wow.
They're going for the evangelicals.
Well, part of that at the very beginning, where they were bringing him up, and they show him basically shoving Pence out of the way, stepping in front of the entire crowd, and primping himself there, while saying this, implying that this is the equivalent of Jesus Christ being humble, right? It is not humble by any stretch of the imagination to practically throw your vice president out of shot so you can step into it in front of everybody else and then primp and stand there like you've done something amazing. As for the claims for being up before 5, I don't think those are true. I mean, we know he's had blocked out entire mornings of hours of executive time, which is basically him watching Fox News until Fox News pissed him off. Right? Staying late, I don't think so. I don't see this guy. This is a guy who cheats at golf.
Yes.
Which is basically, I mean, if you cheat at golf, you're basically cheating yourself because.
Yes.
Yeah. I just, I want to talk about the orange guy as little as possible because he has a legacy and a large following, even in my country, which I find extremely disturbing.
Yes.
But I wonder when. Oh wait, I hope that there are more religious people who are feel as strongly aversive towards Donald Trump as most rational people do, because how you can be any brand of follower of Jesus Christ, even Jesus Christ in his worst moments, is better than Donald Trump. And it's so interesting to me how it is seen as a virtue to get up at 5, which is that in itself. I mean, that idea of
which he doesn't do anyway.
Right, but
that's besides the point. Even if he did get up every morning at 5, I mean, you can get up at 5 every morning and use the time between 5 and 10 to kill people. Does that make you a good person because you did that at 5 in the morning? What is the merit? Why is getting up early in the morning in and of itself? Why is that seen as something good?
that's that Protestant work ethic that came over with the Pilgrims and everything else that they got, the U.S. started. Because I don't see that hard work anywhere else that I'm aware of. But yeah, that's where it comes from. Is idle hands are the devil's workshop, and so you have to keep busy. I was wheeling with some friends, and their kids said he was going to take the wussy way. He was just he's going through a giant mud hole, and everyone told him, don't go straight down the middle because that's where all the tracks are, and you're going to high center yourself because everybody's dug it out. Go to the left or the right. He said he was going to do the wussy way. He used a different word, but you get the idea. And I was like, when is it the wussy way to do things the smart way? Why is it the wussy way to take away that you're going to fail? Because we've told you why you're going to fail, right? We've done this before. We've seen this happen a dozen times. And this is a guy from Alabama, so he's 99% likely to be Christian. But it just seemed like we have this attitude also that doing it the hard way is the best way, right? Because doing it the smart way requires education, and good Lord, we can't have that. I guess. Yeah.
So you're actually in Alabama right now,
Yes,
Jim, I believe.
Right. Yeah, Southern Alabama.
Yeah. Does it affect you? I mean, being surrounded by so many rabid Christians?
Yes and no. I don't hide it, but I don't broadcast it either at the moment. And some of that is due to laziness. Like I just got my Jeep, so I haven't gotten around to putting there's nothing on it that really is personalized on the outside so far. And that's, again, laziness. But for the most part, when I go and do activities, we talk about the activity, we talk about our hobbies. We don't talk about religion. However, there is an implicit assumption that I go to one of the hundreds of churches in this little town of Dothan. Maybe 1,000 churches. It's probably pushing it even for this place. But there are roads where there are 3 churches right next door to each other.
Yeah.
3 different denominations, right? So there is
amazing. It's amazing that there's enough business for all of them, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't put 3 theaters side by side, would you?
No, you sure wouldn't. But they're different denominations, and so Baptists won't be caught dead in the Methodist Church and the same. So they're not all necessarily always the same size. Sometimes they're different sizes. But yeah, it's just absolutely amazing that there is enough business to keep them all in business, to keep pastors. I assume the pastors are working full time. Maybe they're not. Maybe they could, it could be their part-time gig for all I know. I think what is more interesting is there's more about Trump and Trumpisms that I hear than I do Christianity, which goes back to what we just played, right? If we're talking about this area, I see more people talking about illegal immigrants. This is Alabama. We don't have illegal immigrants here, right? Florida does not have, it's not the border of Texas, right? Or Arizona or New Mexico. So why are they, they're talking about things they don't understand and don't know. I spent most of my adult life in Arizona. I've spent a number of years in Texas. And the immigrant problem is not anywhere near as bad as people say it is. It's a problem, but it's not as bad as as right-wing media might make you think. So, and there's just a lot of that kind of stuff. My girlfriend's a nurse. She's a travel nurse. She's in ICU. And so when she says things like it's unsafe numbers and all of this, they don't seem to realize that the problems that they're having in nursing in this country are directly related to capitalism.
Yeah.
If you're trying to make a profit as a hospital, it's no different. It's slightly different than a hotel. A hotel makes money on heads and beds. Hospital does as well. And also because they need to reduce the ratio of patients to nurses, not increase that. And if you increase rate, or you increase the number of patients per nurse, you decrease successful outcomes. So you want to know why health is failing in this country? Well, this is why. There's only one state in the union that actually mandates by law safe ratios, and that's California.
Wow. Well, we could talk a lot about health services because, of course, over here in the UK, we have the National Health Service. So it is a nationalized service, which means that we all pay a little bit into it, whether we're sick or well. And the idea being that if we do fall sick, then we should get treated free. And because this can be done because having such a large customer base, it means that the NHS can negotiate very low prices for all the products and services that are required. And of course, over where you are, and I've experienced this a bit myself when I've traveled in the US of A, you don't have so much. I like to think that Europe has caring and America has capitalism. That's the difference. And one time when I was in the US of A, I had a reoccurrence of an eye irritation. It was something I'd had before, and I knew I'd got some drops from my doctor. So I knew what to do, and it cures it every time. Just a few of these drops. So I went to the local hospital. It was in Florida. No, I think it was in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. It might have been in Florida. It's all a blur.
Right.
But I bought. It
wouldn't have mattered much.
No, exactly. Yeah. So I went to the hospital. I saw the doctor. I said, I need some of these. So he wrote me a prescription. He didn't have to examine me or determine my symptoms. I told him what I wanted. So he wrote me the prescription. I went to the in-hospital pharmacy. I spent $12. I got my drops. I put them in my eyes. My eyes recovered. Never had it again. Then I got home from this trip and I received 2 invoices. One was from the doctor who wanted $75 for the consultation in which I told him what I wanted. And then the other one was for $300 from the hospital for providing the room where I saw him.
Yeah, you got out for pretty cheap, honestly. Very cheaply.
My travel insurance picked up the bill, but that's the difference between medication, the medical service in the US and in the UK and most of Europe too. Yeah.
We have a legal concept in the United States known as a medical bankruptcy. You can declare bankruptcy because your medical bills are too high.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why. Why do we need to do that? We're the richest country in the world by any stretch of the imagination, and yet we can't afford to pick up health care, and we have to make people choose, do I pay rent or do I pay my hospital bill?
Well,
what is that?
So Jim, you sound to me as if you're actually the worst of both worlds, because you not only have non-capitalist, I won't dare to call it communist inclinations, but at least you have non-capitalist inclinations, and you're an atheist. How do you survive in the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Well, I ask a lot of questions. I ask questions like, why should somebody have to choose between paying rent or paying for the hospital bill? Why should somebody go into bankruptcy because they slipped, fell, broke their back?
Yeah.
through no fault of their own, and now have to have their family be thrown out of their house because they couldn't make their mortgage payment. Why is that a thing? Is that right? Should we be doing that? Is that worse than some sort of government subsidized medicine than anything else that we have? And they go, well, we have death panels, and I'm like, what do you think we have now? There's no death panel, but they're literally choosing between getting thrown out of their house or living.
Yes.
There's your death panel.
And the one factor that determines that is how wealthy you are.
Yes. Very much.
And then we haven't discussed the fact that how wealthy you are is mostly determined by how wealthy your parents were, and how intelligent you are, and what access to resources you had, and you're born into all of that. You can go
to a very cheap county hospital and get the appropriate care, or you can go to Mayo Clinic or a Mayo hospital, which is generally considered to be pretty top tier. But you can't go to Mayo if you're not rich. Or you don't have good health insurance that you're paying through the nose for, right? So you can go to either one. I know, like when I was living in Phoenix, there's a heart hospital, Arizona Heart Hospital, that had an emergency room. They had an emergency room to keep the doors open because they specialized in heart medicine. So they needed a way to keep the doors open, so they opened an emergency room. Well, if you live in Phoenix and you want to go to the emergency room and you want to get through it quickly, go to the Arizona Heart Hospital, because they don't have ambulances showing up every 5 minutes dropping off patients. That'll clog the emergency room, and so it's faster. But if you don't know things like that, imagine that. That makes no sense. Why are people going to the emergency room for colds, and maybe it's a broken bone, maybe it's not, or severe sprains? There's all kinds of stuff that we go to the emergency room here simply because there's no other way to do it. Trying to get to a regular doctor could take you a lot longer. And by the way, this is all before COVID.
Yes.
It's worse now.
So,
my girlfriend, go ahead.
The thing that I notice is that one peculiarity of the American culture at the moment is demonization. Anything that doesn't fit into the narrow panorama of Christian evangelical right-wing policy is demonized. So, for example, because we have a national health service, it's not deemed to be something good and something that people might envy. It's deemed to be, woo, communism, horrible.
Right. And by people who don't know the difference between communism, socialism, and democratic socialism, right?
Yeah.
Don't know the difference between these three things. They're three completely different concepts, and they don't know what they can't tell you. They can't even tell you what the definition of communism is. Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, again, we're 80 to 90% Christian, and evangelicals think anything that isn't from the Bible is of the devil. Yeah. If you want the super oversimplified but mostly accurate, I don't, and most of this country isn't that evangelical right wing either. But there's enough of them now that are politicians and are sitting in state legislatures and in the judiciary, that they're the ones that are screaming the loudest. So
they've got themselves into positions of power. So if people are watching us and wondering where they've seen Jim before, it's in Atheist Experience, which he sometimes co-hosts. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, Jim?
Yeah, I do. We've got enough folks doing it now that it's I do it about once a month. And I will be on this month, I think at the end of the month. Started doing that a number of years ago. I happened to move to Austin from Phoenix, And one of the reasons I moved to Austin is because it's one of the top 5 happiest cities in the country. And also the Atheist Experience was being shot there. And I was like, that would be kind of fun to do the show maybe. So I'll move there. One Saturday they were shooting Nonprofits, which is still a show. And it really is a good show. It's a news show talking about news and stuff. But they needed a third. And I happened to be in the studio at the time. And they liked it and said, hey, you want to come back on? I said, sure. So I did a few Nonprofits, and then I think I did Talk Heathen, and then on to Atheist Experience, and done that ever since. So I still like Nonprofits, but the format, I think, being everything remote is harder for me than doing it face to face. It's hard enough doing Atheist Experience remote where I can't see what the other person is getting. You know, there's always that delay that happens, and we've done it here a couple of times. And in a show like Nonprofits, I think it's much harder to do. But so then I've done a few other shows. I've done some shows on the line and some of the things. I don't have my own channel that I'm active on. I do have a YouTube channel, but there's nothing on it. But that may be changing soon. I keep telling myself that, but quite frankly, I know all the work that gets done and goes on behind the scenes, and I may have mentioned this before, but I'm kind of lazy, so doing all that doesn't really do much for me.
I want to ask about co-hosting the show, because watching the Atheist Experience was instrumental in my own, process of deconversion, I suppose. Although by the time I was watching the show, I was already my mind was made up that there was no God, at least not the God of the Christian Bible. But the reason I still watch it and keep on watching it is because I find it fascinating how to manage these conversations. And there's a practical element to it in doing online conversations where you have a delay, you have a lag, which makes the interaction more difficult on a practical level. But once one has managed that part, I want to call it the science of having productive conversations about controversial topics is actually something I think that needs a lot of research. And I enjoy watching the interactions. And I haven't had enough of those in that almost, it is a little bit confrontational, although confrontational doesn't have to mean aggressive. And I think that's the first thing that needs to be established. What did you learn? Because having these conversations is a continuous learning process. And I would like to know from you, as somebody who has hosted the show numerous times and who's doing it quite well, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So congratulations, because it's not something everybody can do, because you have to maintain a particular distance while engaging and also listen to what the other person is saying. What's the most useful skill that you think you've learned hosting a show like the Atheist Experience?
What a good question.
Active listening, listening and thinking at the same time, not thinking to necessarily respond, but thinking in terms of, okay, where is he going and what are they saying? What does this really mean? Trying to pull this apart. Because you'll give you an example, going with the teleological argument, watchmaker argument. Right. If somebody starts with the watchmaker argument, it's pretty easy to figure out where they're going because it's well known. But if somebody starts with, you have an automobile. Well, where are they going with this? Right. You can assume that they're making a teleological argument and they're going to the same place as a watchmaker argument, but they may not be because they don't understand the argument well enough to make a good analogy. So you're trying to follow along and, where they're going with that. And part of that is knowing what the arguments are really well, and knowing the subject matter well. And so that's somewhat experience, but that's also cracking books and reading and watching a lot of other shows and building your knowledge base on that. That helps a lot with that. But you're also never stop actively listening, because they may go someplace you didn't realize. And that's sometimes why that's why we have two hosts. I may not pick up on where they're going, but the co-host, the other person sitting next to me, may very well pick that up. And so that's why you sometimes you will see kind of a tag team going on, as we're picking up different things from what they're saying. But that process of listening not to respond, but listening to understand, and doing that first goes a really, really long way to doing that. Because keep in mind that while we're doing that, we're also looking at how much time has elapsed with this caller, how many calls we currently have in the backlog. And also sometimes we're listening to something going on in our ear that no one else can hear because the producers are saying something we need to know. So we're paying attention to all this stuff all at the same time. And if you wonder why, sometimes a caller goes long, sometimes it's because there's no one else on. We either talk to this person or we talk to each other. What do we want to do? Right?
Yeah, that must be a hazard of phone-ins, mustn't it? We don't do phone-ins here, so we can pull people out of the text whenever we want, like James, for example, who's also put his sixpenneth in on this subject. Thanks, James. Yeah. So,
And
Jim, sorry, you had a go. It's my go.
you go.
You see, the reason I got Tercia as a co-host is because I wanted some eye candy.
Yeah, there is something to be said for that.
Well, the only comment I can make on that is, shame, John. I really pity you that the best you could get towards, as far as eye candy goes, is a 51-year-old mother of 3.
Well,
my sincere condolences. I bet you got more than you bargained for, because now you actually have somebody who can't stop talking as well.
yeah, but I can mute. Okay, I have the power.
You have the power. Power be power to the greatest, Lord John.
Jim, you're obviously an active atheist. How did you get to be like that? I mean, what was your upbringing? Tell us.
I'm an Air Force brat, born Catholic. I was never a strong Catholic, although my parents are. We did parochial school, so I've been to a number of Catholic schools. When we weren't in Catholic school, my sister and I were in CCD, which is once or twice a week, depending.
Sorry, what is CCD?
Basically, it's Catholic school. And it's just on Catholicism and being a Catholic and religion.
Okay. So it's not school. It's like catechism.
Yeah, it's a catechism, but it is, yeah. And you go in the evening after school. And sometimes it's taught in the same classrooms that the kids go to in the daytime. It just kind of depends on the parish and that kind of thing. So I had it all. I was never a strong, what I would consider a strong believer. I know a number of atheists who went through some real heartache and some real trauma coming out, and I never did. I describe myself as I wandered out of Christianity, and I started I started going, well, I should go know more about my faith, and so I went in and started looking at some Catholic apologetics, and that was the beginning of the end, and it came pretty quickly.
What age were you, Jim?
I was in my 20s.
Okay.
At that point. But I hadn't been to church in 5, 6, 7 years. And certainly even then it wasn't on a regular basis. So I wasn't really, strong. Like I said, I wasn't as strong. I didn't have, Catholicism is pretty much Christianity light compared to Westboro Baptist Church or some of those other organizations, right? Catholic Church is much more liberal these days.
Yeah.
Bible is not, we don't take the Bible literally, that kind of thing. It's really, evolution happens. The world is not flat. However the universe works, God caused it, is the philosophy. So even from that point of view, wasn't super indoctrinated. So it
Jim,
was
I want to
not
ask
the
something.
anguish. Yeah.
Two questions. So, firstly, did you ever sing were you ever a choir boy? First thing. Second,
no.
That's it. Okay. So, second thing, the idea of confession in the Catholic Church has always fascinated me, and I don't know what part. So I'm a Protestant, so you would have your people would have killed mine about 300 years ago.
And vice versa, right? Violence is a two-way street.
No, but the Protestant never killed the Catholic.
You're an ex-Protestant. Get it right.
But having grown up in a faith that taught that there were two things that we were very much afraid of. The one was communism, and the other one was Catholicism. Those were the two evils, the red dangers, we call the rooi gevaar in Afrikaans. But watching movies and reading, the idea of a confessional and going into this enclosed space where you whisper. How many confessions did you do? Do you have to go on is there like a prescription that you have to go sort of once a month or once a week? Did you ever, and what does it feel like to go into that little, do you feel a sense of relief once because I can imagine that, if I've told a lie, there's some, I think it's quite a healthy practice, this whole thing of confession. Tell us, let something out of the confessional, please.
So the practice has changed over the years. When my mom was a kid, and probably through most of her adult life, really until Vatican II, before you could go to communion on Sunday, you had to go to confession. Preferably just before it, but usually the day before. So on Saturday you'd go to confession, and Sunday you'd go to church, and that was to have as pure a soul as possible to receive communion, because you couldn't receive communion with any kind of sin. Then it became, I don't know if it was Vatican II that changed it or after that, but after that it became you can't have a mortal sin. So you have to go to confession if you have a mortal sin on you.
What is a mortal sin?
Oh, now you're really getting into stuff that I haven't thought about in years. Murder would be a mortal sin. Lying on a certain.
The seven.
Yeah, the seven deadly ones would be pretty good. Yeah.
So what happens if you turn up? You've got to do your confession, but you haven't really got anything sinful to report. You go into the sanctuary of the confessional and abuse yourself before the priest gets there. Is that it?
No, so the priest has got to be in there. There's a whole ritual. There's this, as with most things that are Catholic, there's a call and response, right? Type thing going on. If I remember correctly, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been X number of days, years, months, whatever, since I was last in confession. And then he says something, I don't remember what he says. And then you start telling him what you've done. And as a kid, I can always remember going, well, I haven't really done anything that bad. I wasn't a Dennis the Menace. I wasn't a good kid, a perfect kid by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, you go in and you try to think anything.
Yes.
And then, because you have to say something, right? So you think about the little white lies you may have told, or I played a trick on my sister or whatever it was, whatever you could think of.
Could you say, for example, sorry, Jim, could you say, my sin must be vanity because I can't think of anything I've done badly. So anything bad I've done, so I must be vain. Did you
I never thought of that. I'll put that in. I've got some cousins who are still Catholic. I'll put that in there. See what happens.
Can't think of anything. If you can't think of anything, go for vanity, because the fact that you can't think of that you've done anything bad is.
Yeah. So some of it's just being put on the spot like that, right? Yeah. It's not that you haven't. It's anytime you get put on the spot. What's your favorite book? Okay, right. So some of it's that, but yeah, it's the whole ritual thing, and I never really felt relief because I didn't really do anything that bad.
Yeah. So I would be so tempted to send up the whole thing. So I would be in there saying, "I think of you, priest, with lust."
Yeah, no. Let's not tempt them any more than they already are. Also, yeah, yeah. I'm sure I never felt the need to do that. I was less sarcastic as a kid than I am now. So, but yeah.
So you've grown.
Yeah, I have baggage, and it hurts sometimes. Yeah.
So you've explained how you got out of Catholicism, but why are you now an active atheist? I mean, at the moment you're doing stuff to help people shed their beliefs.
Because it became very apparent to me even 10, 15, 20 years ago that there was a whole lot going on, that it was not good. Being a Catholic, I'm well aware of all the problems with the priesthood, and all the problems that the Catholicism has had over the years, and realizing that a lot of that was because of these beliefs. And there are certain consequences to being a Christian. And there are consequences that make no sense outside of that context. Today, we have preachers who feel perfectly okay saying on stuff they know is going to YouTube that we should kill the LGBTQA community.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that wasn't prevalent 20 years ago, but that kind of stuff was out there. And
YouTube wasn't around 20 years ago, so we didn't video it. But I've got lots of clips of priests and mullahs and imams and pastors saying stuff like that, horrifying, anti-humane stuff.
Right.
And that's why I'm in this business. So we're kindred spirits.
Yeah, and while like the Catholic Church does have things like Boys Town, does have the Underground Railroad during World War II, right, where they were getting Jewish people out of Germany.
Yeah.
While you had that, at the same time, you have the Pope making a deal with Hitler.
Yeah.
And then excommunicating some of those clergy members for going against what he agreed with, right? So you have this weird dichotomy with the Catholic Church of people trying to do the right thing while at the same time you have other people in the same church doing the wrong thing. But a lot of this, a lot of the reason why the Catholic Church plays whack-a-mole with their priests is because of their beliefs. They're not turning priests over to the authorities because of their beliefs, and that to me is just wrong. You're doing the right thing should always take advantage. And I might have a different feeling if the church took someone who's a pedophile priest and putting them in a monastery in the middle of nowhere where they had zero contact with kids. That would be one thing. But that's not what the church does by any stretch of the imagination. So that's wrong. And there's other things you can look at too there.
Yeah. It's all about protecting your buddies, isn't it, the church?
Yes. Yeah. There was a bishop in Phoenix, the late 90s, who was well respected by everybody, well loved, seen to be as a perfect example of a priest, except, of course, that he protected a number of pedophile priests.
Yeah.
And that never sat, that to me undoes everything that he just did, right? Because that horror goes on long past the deed itself is done. And the church doesn't see it that way.
No.
It just, there's all this kind of other stuff that goes on within the church that really, the other Christian faiths have the same problem. They're just better at hiding it. They're not out in front like the Catholic Church is. But the Mormons have the same problem. The Baptists have the same problem. They all have this problem with men in power and sex. Those two things in combination. Whether it's gay sex or heterosex, it doesn't really matter. But you have this problem with the pastor and the appropriate gendered person in almost everyone. And the more conservative, and I think the more Bible thumbing they are, the bigger the problem they have.
Yeah. So the one thing that differentiates the Catholic religion from the other Christian religions is celibacy. And there's a move afoot at the moment. There's a key cardinal who's got the ear of the Pope, who is trying to persuade them to drop the requirement for priests to be celibate. He's saying that we've got a shortage of priests, and at the moment we're turning some away just because they want to get married. We shouldn't be doing that. And you never know. If that becomes accepted, maybe they'll start taking women.
That would be the next step, yeah. I've never understood it. Was Christ celibate? Well, there's a lack of evidence in the Bible to support that, or to confirm it, right? We don't have a record of how many times he went to the bathroom, so maybe he never went to the bathroom. They're saying the same thing with the celibacy idea, right? We know that there are disciples that he loved best. What does that mean? So yeah, it's very weird, the whole celibacy thing, to me, and I never understood it. I still don't understand it. And it's been explained to me several times, and it's just like, that still makes no sense.
One of the troubles that I had with Christianity, and that was the reason that I left eventually, was the Bible, because the entire Christian faith is based upon the Bible. Now, I'm not sure how well Catholics are taught the Bible, and I'm saying that because in my experience, many of the more evangelical churches don't encourage in an academic way almost, especially children learning what the Bible says in a systematic way. So the church that I grew up in, one of the more strict Calvinist Protestant branches, we had to do Bible study, as in by the end of your 18th year, if you attended Sunday school regularly, as you were forced to do, and there was a register taken, and if you didn't attend Sunday school, we call it catechism, then your parents would be called, and there would be a reckoning because you hadn't been to catechism. So we were taught the Bible in its entirety. We read from Genesis, Kings, all of it, and we were tested on it, which means that, and I'm talking 30 years ago, we had a very thorough knowledge of the Bible as a text. Although most people don't think about what the stories actually say, they just go through the motions. I was always a keen reader and I loved stories, so I always questioned the characters and not questioned, just I sort of dug into the characters and tried to think about their motivations like I would with any other story that I was reading. And that opened me up to how little we actually can know about the even characters like Jesus. We know so little, and what we do know is not always good. And I began to see Jesus as a character in a work of fiction, although I still at that time accepted the Bible as the Word of God. But the moment you look at the Bible as the Word of God, then it becomes a very imperfect text, and that opens up if God is the Almighty, all-knowing. Let's forget about all good. Why does he find it impossible to put forth a text that can be read without misunderstanding? Because it was the single thing that made me question my faith. Because how is it possible that two people who are both convinced that they love God, that God loves them, that they know God, that they have a relationship with God, and they take the same passage from Scripture and they interpret it in two completely different ways? And this is the catch. If you look at what the text says, it's possible to have those divergent interpretations. Now, when I'm reading literature, that makes the text very interesting. But if I want to base my morality, if I want to base how I act in the world on that text, then that text becomes extremely problematic, because now it's open to the interpretation of the individual. And I think that is what Catholicism did right in the first 5, 6, 1100 years. As long as they stuck to the Latin, only the Latin, and only or mainly the priests being able to sort of filter the message, and the rest of the populace not even being able to read it, I think that's actually the way to go. Like the Muslims do.
Well, of course, this is the way Islam has gone too, isn't it? Nobody, even Arabic speakers can't understand the Quran because it's written in a historic version of whatever language it was. And so the thing you're talking about here is, as far as God's concerned, creating a universe, that's easy. Clear communication, however, ooh.
Yeah. So with the Catholics, every Mass there are 3 readings, usually, and I forget what the cycle is. I think they're all 3 on different cycles, but every 3 years, if you attend church every day, every 3 years, you'll have the entire Bible read to you. And at one time, that was Latin, and now it's in your local language. And the Mass entirely is done in your local language. But so Catholics get read the Bible, but the homily, the preaching part of the service is where the priest is supposed to tie those 3 things together. And so that sometimes it's problematic because they're 3 completely different passages that have nothing to do with each other. And yet, they do. So I don't know. We do get that. It's just with a completely different focus than what I think the Protestants get. And part of this is because, the Catholic Church got started before the printing press, and most Protestant churches got started after the printing press.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Catholic Church is as ritualistic as it is because of that fact. So how do you teach people? I'm searching for the noise on my side, by the way. I'm not sure where it's coming from. I don't see it. Okay.
I don't think we can do anything.
Hold on. Let me see. Let me mute this real quick and see if I can.
Is that okay? So Jim is muted. So I think it's the storm brewing in the background, Jim. I think it's that tornado.
Could be. Except it sounds like crunching to me. Yeah. I'm not sure where it's coming from, though.
I think it's the software. The software is trying to do compression.
Could be.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
I
I
know
apologize for it. I don't. Yeah. So I don't see it on any of my meters here on my sounds. So anyway. So yeah. So as Catholics, you get this, but also it's the ritual. Just before my dad retired, he was stationed in Korea, South Korea, and I was still a Catholic at the time. And we went to church, and it was really, really interesting to be able to participate in the Mass, even though the Mass was done entirely in Korean. But we could do the call responses, we could participate in the Mass, everything except the homily, by reading along in the English version of the Missal, which is the Mass can take several different forms depending on what the priest wants to do, and you can follow along with the correct calls and responses for it.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of nice to be able to do. Whereas the few times I've been to a Protestant, and I use the term in the most general sense, services, it was all preaching, very little ritual. And that would have made it much harder to do. So there is something to be said for that ritual. I've been, when I was a kid, I remember seeing a older woman in a wheelchair, clearly in dementia, up until the priest started. And she followed along with the Mass. It was the only thing that I think was in her mind, but she'd been to it so many times she was able to participate, which is kind of an interesting side effect of the ritual, right? Of doing that. But we do get, the Catholics do get taught the Bible, but it's not the way that most Protestants get it, because it is read to us. We don't have to read the Bible. It'll be read to us. We get a priest who tries to interpret it, apply it to things going on today, things going on in people's lives, and that's what we get. So it's a different way of looking at it. And like I said, the Catholic Church is no longer as Bible centric or Bible literal as a lot of Protestant religions are.
Yeah. What they were doing was tapping into, they probably didn't realize it at the time, but we do now, tapping into the layers of the brain, because we now know that even people who are severely into dementia, if you play them and sing to them a song from their youth, they'll know it and join in, because what we learn when we're young is somehow deeper in our memory. So although we don't know what happens today or what time it is or what we had for breakfast, we can still remember the old songs that we used to sing, and that's what call and response was tapping into, getting it that deeply embedded, ingrained into the mind, the cunning ploy.
Yes. Yeah, well, you look at going to any Catholic church and then ask yourself, how would you convey this concept before the printing press? And so all the imagery, the Stations of the Cross, all the painted glass windows that depict certain things in certain scenes, all that kind of stuff comes out of this fact that we don't have the written word, because the Catholic Church predates the printing press. And let's not forget, the first book to be printed was the Bible, if I remember correctly. So how do you convey all of this information that's in the Bible in a way that a peasant with no education can understand? And imagery and call and response, all this stuff goes into it. Creeds, things you can repeat. That's how you do that. And so Protestants sometimes like to criticize the Catholic Church for all this. And my response when I was a Catholic was always, well, how would you do this before the printing press and to uneducated peasantry, to uneducated people, whether they were farmers or fishermen or whatever they were? Education wasn't big. So how do you get these ideas across?
The Catholic Church tapped into human psychology in the most brilliant way ever. With all of that. We have about 6 minutes left, and we do know that Lord John will shut us down exactly on the hour, because he's like that, So
I have the power, the power.
I would like to get back before we end off to your atheist activism and ask you about your conversations with callers and whether you've ever had, since you've been a host, I know it's happened in the past on many an occasion, but whether you've actually had subsequent conversations with callers on a sort of behind the scenes where you or a conversation inspired somebody to actually start thinking and make a detour or maybe decide to really question their belief. Have you ever had any experience like that?
Yeah, I've had a couple of people in my tenure actually write and say, "Thank you so much. You were instrumental."
Oh,
As a show, we get that email from a different person about once every month, every 2 months.
wow.
So by extension, we're reaching a number of people. And you go back to what you asked about being on the show. I don't interact personally the same way that I do on the show when I'm having the same conversation, because I know that I'm not going to necessarily convince that caller, and that's not necessarily my goal, or the goal of a lot of us, of the hosts. It's the person listening to the show that we're going to convince, not necessarily that person. Individual conversations, it takes a lot of conversations to do that. But objectively, Dan is a product of the Atheist Experience. He was a caller. Now he's a host on Truth Wanted. He's a host on the other shows. And that's just that's the most visible example that I have. I mean, I go back into the archives and look up names, but I'm not going to out those people because not everybody wants to be outed. But yeah, we have an impact, and I've had one, which is always nice. It's always nice to hear someone say, "Hey, you were part of that." I know I'm never the cause. I'm not the root cause of anything, because that's not the way it works, right? You get a lot. Everybody gets a lot of inputs. Everybody has their own path, their own journey, and to be a part of that, to me, is really, really cool, and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy people stopping me on the street and saying, "Hey, are you?" And I go, "Yes." I'm often awkward in those situations because I'm absolutely shocked anybody actually recognizes me. Once I get over the shock, it's a pardon.
When I saw Jim on a Facebook page, I said, "Are you Jim? That Jim?"
Yeah, I'm the definite article, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, it's more common on Facebook, right? And I have time to react to it and get my thoughts straight before I start typing. But when I'm walking through a grocery store and one of the stalkers says, "Oh, hey, I love you on Atheist Experience," put their hand out, you go to shake it, and they're back to work before you really process it. That's happened before. I don't get it nearly as much as some of the other hosts and some of the hosts that have left the show, like Matt Dillahunty. He gets a lot more than I do. Even when we're together, he gets it more than I do, and that makes sense, right? He's been doing this a lot longer, so that is nice. And if you are that person, and I don't react correctly, just keep in mind that I'm more shocked than you are. Because I don't expect it.
I want to ask something else, John. Sorry, forgive me, but I have to, you see the eye candy. Getting back at you. Did you ever, or have you ever, and have you ever felt anger at a caller? As in, did you ever feel did you ever get emotionally riled up? Has it actually happened? Okay.
I have come completely unglued. Not on the Atheist Experience, but on, I believe, the Sunday show with John Gleason. There is a clip of me. So I'm adopted, and somebody made a comment, and I don't think they knew I was adopted. And they doubled down, and I said something to the effect of, "I am adopted. Do you really want to go down this path?" And they did. And I went ballistic. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And I kind of regret it too, because I don't think I did that person any good whatsoever. I don't think I did any of the callers any good, but they went down a road that just pissed me off no end. mothers who adopt, parents who adopt are just as much parents as biological parents.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You know, a
One
parent is
last
someone
thing.
who wipes your ass and
Yeah.
kisses your knee, your skin knee, right?
Yeah.
So,
Indeed.
Have you
Yeah.
ever, I don't know, I don't recall, have you ever said a swear word on the show?
Blaspheme.
I don't know. I probably have.
Okay.
I don't swear a lot in real life.
Okay.
So if I have, it's probably been, you know, what the F, something along those lines. Or I've used it for effect. I do know that swear words do have an effect and can be added for emphasis. So sometimes I'll use them. If I've used them, it would have been tactically. Because again, you're like I said, you're actively listening. I'm trying not to listen to respond, but listen to understand what they're saying, which is why sometimes I'll interrupt. But also, you know, there aren't that many arguments, there aren't that many ways to present them. So 3 words in, you can sometimes you know exactly where they're going to go. That allows you to get ahead of them quite a bit because they don't know where they're going sometimes, right? There's a really good clip of me going, yeah, I'm not following your script. Because he goes, you're not supposed to say that. And I'm like, oh, I'm not following your script.
They usually want to go down a step-by-step to a gotcha, don't they?
Yes. Yeah. And they don't realize that the step-by-step has no logic to it.
Yeah.
Or the logic is nuanced and they're not going to, you know, they're changing the meaning of a word in the middle of the progression. And sometimes they don't even realize it, right? Because they've been taught it.
Yeah, they don't understand. Don't you just hate equivocation? There you go. Anyway, it's time, folks. We've run over, in fact. So thank you very much. You've been wonderful, as I knew you would, both of you. And I can't tell you who's going to be our guest next week, but there will be somebody. Although I understand we won't have any eye candy.
Aw.
I'll send you a photo. I'm going to a wedding. I'll be at a wedding in the Free State next week, and I'm having a dress made for the second time.
Oh, wow.
The first ever dress I've had made for myself was my wedding dress. So I went to a tailor and I had myself measured, and I'll send you a photo. John, you can put the photo of me in my wedding outfits.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you. I never expected to have something as good as that.
Yeah.
Say bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
Say bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. It was nice having you. Waar kyk jy? Picasso, waar kyk jy? What are you doing, my dearest?